In a records repository outside Kansas City, there is a cardboard box holding the deactivation paperwork of the 559th Strategic Missile Squadron. 3 pages in it are not what you would expect. The first is a deactivation directive for Site 9, dated June 14th, 1963. Every other silo in that squadron stayed on alert for 2 more years. Site 9 was shut down alone, early, at the height of its usefulness. 1 line of justification: site environment unsuitable for sustained crew operations. The second page is a property disposition sheet, 411 items, each transferred, salvaged, or sold. 410 of them. Item 214. Clock, countdown, launch control, 1 each, destroyed on site per commanding officer. In the entire history of the missile program, that is the only clock ever ordered destroyed rather than turned in. Clocks are cheap. Paperwork is not. Somebody chose the paperwork. The third page is a maintenance log. Typed entries, routine. At the bottom, in pencil, unsigned, a single sentence. It does not need the power to run. The man who kept this account was Captain Frank Doyle, a missile combat crew commander. He kept a private journal in violation of 9 regulations and one other thing we will come to at the end. To understand his story, the week and the whole. The week. In October 1962, American reconnaissance photographed Soviet missiles in Cuba. For 13 days, the world walked toward its own edge. On October 24th, Strategic Air Command went to DEFCON 2. 1 step below nuclear war. The only time that order has ever been given. Bombers went airborne and stayed there. And in the plain states, small crews climbed down into holes in the ground, sat beside their missiles, and waited. The hole. The Atlas F was 174 feet deep, hardened against anything except a direct hit. Crews rode an elevator down past 7 levels of steel gratings to a launch control center behind blast doors that weighed as much as trucks. The missile stood in its own concrete throat. Liquid oxygen fueled it when the order came, which is why Atlas crews did not grow old in the job. Several silos were lost to fires during ordinary tests. 5 people matter here. Captain Doyle, crew commander, whose expertise was the launch sequence itself. The cascade of relays and timers he had certified with a stopwatch so many times he could hear a slow relay in his sleep. Major Carl Brandt, the skeptic, a bomberman reassigned to missiles who had a ready explanation for anything. The Soviets. Master Sergeant Aldo Ferro, maintenance, 24 years around machinery, who measured things the way other men prayed. Lieutenant Ray Voss, the site logger, precise and honest to a degree that would cost him. And Airman Danny Klein, 19 years old, who had been in the hole 4 months and had not yet learned which true things you are not supposed to say. What Klein said, on the 4th night of the crisis, the Atlas F cold and silent around him, the launch sequencer dead quiet, was, does anybody else feel like the site is waiting for something? The first count began the night America went to DEFCON 2. At 0311, the launch sequence chart recorder drew the full countdown, 600 seconds, stepping down to 0 in clean ink, exactly as Doyle had seen in certified tests, except no test was running. No key had been turned. The launch sequencer bus, the circuit the recorder listened to, was de-energized. Ferro's red lockout tag hung on the breaker handle where it had been for 9 days. The pens traced a countdown on a dead wire. At 0 they stopped. Nothing launched. Nothing moved. Layer 1. Ink requires signal. Signal requires power. The launch sequencer bus was cold, de-energized for 9 days with Pharaoh's red lockout tag still on the breaker. There was no power. There is the paper. The second count came 2 nights later, starting at 571. The third at 543. Layer 2. The counts were descending not just within themselves, but from event to event, each beginning lower than the last, as if something were growing less patient. Voss logged the starting numbers in his careful hand. 600, 571, 543. That page still exists. Layer 3 was the water. There was a seep on level 6 that dripped into a catch pan. On the last night of October, Pharaoh sat beside it with a certified stopwatch and timed 500 consecutive drips. Every interval was 1 second, not roughly 1 second. 1 second to the limit of the watch, 500 times without a single deviation. Seeps surge and slacken with pressure and temperature. That is what water does. Pharaoh logged the figures and delivered his finding to Brandt in 1 sentence. Water does not keep time. In November, the counting spread. The radiation survey meter in the fuel bay began to click in descending integers. Understand why that one broke men who had held steady. A Geiger counter clicks at random because radioactive decay is random. Not random like weather, random like arithmetic. One of the few genuinely lawless things in the universe, and its lawlessness is the law. Pharaoh put the meter on the bench and counted against his stopwatch. 100 clicks in the first minute, 99 in the second, 98 in the third, down, integer by integer, to 0. And then 10 minutes of a silence that instrument should not have been capable of, in a bay full of faintly radioactive gauges. Layer 4. Decay is random. That is not a rule men made. Something in that hole was overruling it. Layer 5 was the sump. The sump at the bottom of Site 9 was 12 feet deep. On the blueprints, cleaned by Pharaoh. On November 6th, checking a level gauge, Pharaoh lowered a steel surveyor's tape into it. The tape read 60 feet and was still slack. He fed it 200 feet and never found bottom. When he hauled it back up, the tape was wet on the first 12 feet only. Below 12 feet, it had been hanging in something dry and dark and 188 feet deeper than the blueprints of the deepest thing men had built there. Downward. Everything pointed downward. The counterintelligence team came, swept the site for 3 days, and found no device, no tap, no tampered circuit. Their report's conclusion is one of the quiet masterpieces of Air Force understatement. No evidence of hostile activity, anomalies unexplained. Recommend continued observation. Brandt read it twice and handed it back. His sane explanation, the Soviets, some human author, had been formally taken away. He did not replace it. He simply stopped offering explanations, which in a commanding officer is its own kind of sound a hull makes. Go back to October 27th, Black Saturday. A U-2 was shot down over Cuba. Depth charges fell near a Soviet submarine whose officers were debating a nuclear torpedo. Of all the days in the Cold War, this is the one historians agree the world came nearest the edge. That evening at Site 9, the count began at 86, not 600, 86 seconds. And this time the missile itself responded. Guidance gyros spun up uncommanded, relays in the comet lock chain, cycled in sequence. A liquid oxygen topping valve opened. The missile, inert, disconnected, was rehearsing. Pharaoh went to the equipment bays with insulated gloves and physically pulled cable connectors while the relays fought him. Men on that shift swore later, in a report almost no one was cleared to read, that connectors reseated themselves. He burned both hands. He kept pulling. At 23:41, the count reached 0. Everything stopped. Nothing had launched. The next day, Khrushchev announced the missiles would leave Cuba. The crisis ended. The world exhaled. And that night at Site 9, the counting resumed. This is the thing that should comfort and doesn't. The crisis was over. The reason was gone. The count came back anyway, starting higher than they'd ever recorded, patient again, as if a deadline had passed and a new one had been set. Pharaoh did the arithmetic. Every count they had logged, run forward from its own start time, reached 0 at the same moment. 2341 local time, October 27th, 1962. The thing had never been counting down the missile. It had been counting down to the closest instant of the whole Cold War. The second the world nearly ended. When the world didn't end, it reset towards something else. Some other date further out. On November 9th, with a count running through the 400s, Airman Klein rode the elevator to level 7 to read the sump gauge. Standard task. 90 seconds down, 90 back. The position indicator, 7 lamps, 1 per level, showed an 8th lamp light on a panel built for 7. Voss was watching it. He wrote afterward that the 8th lamp did not look new. It looked worn, like it had always been there, waiting to be used. The car stayed at the 8th lamp for 71 seconds. Then it came back up, empty. The gate was latched from inside. In the center of the floor, Klein's flashlight stood upright on its base, beam on the ceiling, placed. They searched every level for 11 days. 7 levels because there are only ever 7 levels, and no scar or socket where an 8th ever was. They never found him. Klein was carried as AWOL, a 19-year-old with a spotless record, listed as a deserter from the bottom of a guarded hole in the ground. The next count did not start in the hundreds. It started at 31,536,000. Doyle did that arithmetic in about 4 seconds. It is the number of seconds in a year. It had been given time. In December, Brandt ordered the sump drained and entered. Pumps ran 2 days. He climbed down the ladder himself and stood on the dry concrete floor of a 12-foot pit, exactly as the blueprints promised, and heard the count from below. Through the floor, through the bottom of the deepest thing men had dug there, patient and even and unhurried, in his own voice. He climbed out and was done. The paperwork was his recommendation for immediate deactivation. Every word chosen to say everything and name nothing, the source of that surviving line. Site environment unsuitable for sustained crew operations. It ended his career. The axe was for the clock. On his final day of command, he took a fire axe off the wall and destroyed the launch control countdown clock in front of Doyle and 2 witnesses, then annotated the property book in his own hand. Item 214, destroyed on site per commanding officer. He wanted it on the record that a man had done this on purpose. Site 9 was deactivated June 14th, 1963. Then the Air Force shut off the sump pumps, by order in writing. The government does not abandon a $15 million hole because of damp. It floods one to drown something. Brandt spent the next 17 years in a house with no clocks. He never wore a watch. He died in 1979. Ferro retired to a fire lookout tower in Montana, the highest, driest, most above-ground job the federal government offered. He carried a stopwatch in his pocket for the rest of his life, clicking it and checking it several times an hour, starting it, stopping it, making sure seconds still ran forward. Voss worked night shifts for 40 years and never entered a basement. At his retirement dinner, someone asked about missiles, and he said one sentence: "I served in a hole that was deeper on the inside." He did not laugh. Klein's family spent 2 decades writing letters. In 1988, the Air Force quietly amended his status to died in the line of duty, cause undetermined, without explanation, without ceremony, without one atom of him ever being found. Doyle kept the artifact, one roll of chart paper from the night of October 27th, the trace from 86 to 0, the gyro spin-up, the temperature line with its impossible square corners. His family has it. It is the only instrument record of that autumn that was not collected, because nobody thought to count the rolls. The empty Atlas silos were sold as surplus. People own them now, some as homes, some as data vaults. Divers go into the flooded ones, cold, black, still water, 170 feet down through drowned steel. Divers describe it as the quietest water in America. Site 9 has been sold twice. Both owners walked away from the deed. It stands flooded to the 3rd level. The title holder, a holding company, pays a caretaker to confirm monthly that the water level has not dropped. In 2014, 2 divers went in. Both surfaced early, and both dive reports, written 16 years apart by people who had never met, noted the same malfunction. Their bottom timers ran backward, counting down from numbers neither had set. The 2014 diver said one thing to the boat tender before he had his tank off: "I didn't want to be down there when it got to 0. In November 2022, the caretaker's monthly report noted something the holding company had never seen in 59 years of ownership. The water level had dropped. Not risen, dropped by 6 feet in 30 days. No pump had run. The silo is sealed. There is no explanation for where 6 feet of water goes in a sealed hole. A new caretaker was hired in January 2023. The previous one did not leave a forwarding address, and nobody has been back in the water since, because the question nobody wants to answer out loud is this: if something in that silo was counting down for 60 years, and the water is falling, and the divers don't want to be there when it reaches 0, what does it mean that the counting stopped? There are explanations. Infrasound from moving groundwater generates dread and the felt sense of a presence. Stray ground currents twitch relays. Frightened men on nuclear alert in a concrete hole are not neutral observers. All true. It explains the fear. It does not explain ink on a dead wire. It does not explain 500 drips at exactly 1 second each. And it does not explain a Geiger counter. The one clock nobody built. The one clock nobody winds. Agreeing in that hole to count down. The pencil line in the Kansas City archive is unsigned. From a site the government drowned on purpose. From a page otherwise filled with routine. It does not need the power to run. Where history ends and our story begins, we will let you decide where the line falls.